Alright, so now that you have learned about weathering, erosion, and deposition, let's compare and see what do they have in common and how are they different. So we're going to compare and contrast. So how we're going to do that is we're going to use a triple Venn diagram. We have 3 topics. Okay, so in this section we're going to put everything about weathering. And then in this section we're going to put what we know about erosion. Where weathering and erosion cross, right here, we're going to put how they are both similar. In this tiny spot, which I did not think about when I made this, is where we're going to put how they're all 3 in common, because all 3 of the circles overlap. Here, we're going to put how weathering and deposition are similar. What do they have in common? And then in this section, what do they have in common? Erosion and deposition, okay? Alright, so let's start with weathering. Weathering is the breaking down of rock. So it actually breaks it into sediment. Okay, so it is the breaking down of rock into sediments. Okay, the breaking down, that part is super important. Alright, so what do we know about weathering? That the agents of weathering and erosion are similar. So since they're similar, we're going to put them in the spot where they overlap. Okay, so water helps with weathering and erosion. Okay, it also helps. Ice also helps, and wind also helps. So we're going to put water, ice, and wind in that section where erosion and weathering overlap. Now, animals and growing plants are also agents of weathering. Remember, an agent is something that helps cause something happen. Alright, so it's kind of like the instigator. Alright, it's going to cause that change to happen. There's 2 types of weathering. That's chemical and physical. Okay, so now what do we know about erosion? Okay, erosion is the movement of sediment. Remember, sediment is broken rock, pieces. Okay, pieces of rock. All right, gravity is an agent of erosion. And so erosion is going to transport sediment. Okay? It's going to transport sediment. Alright? So, what do erosion and deposition, well, let's go on to deposition first before we do what they have in common. I apologize for that. Alright, so what is deposition? Alright, it is the dropping off of sediment in a new location. That is super important to remember. Okay, so there's 2 parts. The dropping off of sediment in a new location. Okay, so an example would be a sand dune that you see at the beach. Alright, this is where sediment usually builds up during deposition. Alright, so let's look at what do erosion and deposition have in common. They help move sediment. Okay, and what do weathering and deposition have in common? So the rocks are weathered. All right, this one was kind of tough because weathering is actually the breaking down of rock. Deposition is the dropping off of rock. So what do they have in common? This rock that has been deposited is already weathered. Okay, and in weathering, it gets broken down through either chemical or physical processes. So they have in common that those rocks are weathered. Okay, which could also go in this section as well. All right, all of these processes create landforms, and landforms is going to be our next lesson. Okay, so weathering breaks down the rock, erosion moves that rock, and deposition drops it off. Weathering and erosion, they use water, ice, and wind to help that happen, and then gravity pulls down on things, so gravity is going to help move that rock, and then the rocks are broken down, they're moved, and then they're dropped off, creating new landforms like sand dunes and canyons and things like that. So here is your weathering, erosion, and deposition Venn diagram, and this would go in your notebook as number 12.